Hold on, stop right there. Before you toss out last year's potting soil like it's yesterday's garbage, let's talk. Because seriously, gardeners are literally throwing away gardening gold, and it's gotta stop. First, because potting soil ain't cheap, and it's basically made of organic stuff. You know, things like peat moss, coco coir, and bark, those are things that belong in your garden, not in a landfill. So if you've been dumping soil every season, stick around because I'm about to save you so much time, money, and give your plants a serious boost. So let's address this dirty little myth up front. The idea that you have to start with brand new potting soil each season. Who started that rumor? Well, I guess it would be a profitable marketing plan. So perhaps it has been gardening centers that are pushing bags of soil. But here's the truth. Soil does not have an expiration date. Now sure, nutrients get used up and the texture changes, but that soil is still very much alive and usable. And I truly get it. For example, if you had a container that grew a sad, scraggly plant, you might eye that soil with a side of suspicion. And maybe you saw some mold or you're worried about bugs or disease. These are all valid concerns, but none of them require tossing your soil. Think of your soil like a phone battery. When it's drained, you don't throw the whole phone away, you just recharge it. So here's the scoop. That old potting mix actually has some hidden advantages. First, you have information that that soil is alive. Wait, what? Yep, if you've grown in it, the chances are high that it's no longer inert fluff from a bag because it's been colonized with beneficial microbes and fungi that help plants thrive. Your soil, any soil, is going to develop its own tiny ecosystem of helpers like microorganisms and earthworms, so why throw that away? Second, organic matter in the soil doesn't vanish. It just breaks down into teeny tiny particles. And the best way to think about this is like old roots that decompose right there in the pot. And those bits continue to provide nutrients and contribute to soil structure. This is absolutely true, and you've likely seen this in action in your own garden. For example, have you ever pulled out last year's roots and seen that white fuzzy stuff or found earthworms in your soil? Then congratulations, your soil is alive and kicking. That white fuzz is completely harmless, and in fact, its job is to help to decay those roots and essentially turn it into plant food. And worms are basically the free labor force of the garden. They aerate and fertilize the soil as they wiggle around. Now let's talk about money and sustainability too, because buying bags of potting soil is expensive. So reusing potting soil saves you a trip or 5 to the garden center. And it keeps perfectly good organic materials circulating in your garden instead of rotting away in a plastic bag. And reusing potting soil isn't just smart for your wallet, it's eco-friendly too. And finally, I want you to consider this, that some gardeners swear that old potting soil, when cared for, actually grows better plants than new potting soil. And that's because it's not sterile. Fresh potting soil can be a blank slate, but used potting soil has character. A bit of humus, a dash of microbes, maybe some mycorrhizae forming networks. The best I can describe it is like sourdough starter. The longer you keep it going with regular feeds of organic matter, the richer it gets. Now I know you're trying to hear me out on this, but the question you may have in your mind right now is, okay, so if my soil is so great, why did my plants look so miserable last year? Fair question. There are a few things that can happen to potting soil over time, but we can fix each one. One of the issues you may be having is nutrient depletion because plants are hungry. Those roots are constantly sipping up nutrients from the soil, but watering your garden washes some of that out. And especially in containers because water flushes out those nutrients through the drainage holes. And so by the season's end, a lot of that easy access food in the soil is actually gone. And that's because it's either been used by plants or it's just leached away. And the solution to that is to just add nutrients back, and hang on tight because I'm going to get to that in the next section. So just remember that spent soil is only truly spent if you never refuel it. But in my garden, I refuel things like a NASCAR pit stop. Now, another thing that can happen with your soil is compaction and texture changes. So over time, your soil particles are going to settle, and the fluffy bits like peat and coco coir actually break down into even smaller particles. And that's how your once light potting mix starts to get dense. And it's always the usual suspect. So you'll either start to notice that water is sitting for longer on top of your soil, or it looks like the soil level is dropping by like an inch or 2. But again, this is normal because as organic matter decomposes, volume reduces. And another thing to note is that if you were using initially a peat-based mix, these over time, as they completely dry out, can actually start to change into being hydrophobic, meaning that they start to repel water. And the fix is just to loosen things up and to add some fresh bulk. So you're just going to grab one of these, but quite honestly, I just use my hands, and you're going to crumble that soil apart. Okay, so here's the fun part. We're going to play soil scientist in your own backyard. So here's what I do and what you're going to do now too. Now, full disclosure, I've already revived all of my planters for this season, but I do have footage showing you what they looked like before. And I'm going to model the process using this sad little pot right here. So the first thing that I like to do is dump and inspect. And you'll do this by either dumping your potting mix into a wheelbarrow or a large tub. So this is the step where I can start to break things up and to see what's what. And this is the part where you want to pull out any big roots or sticks or any other random debris. So I highly recommend using a soil sifter, and this is the one that I have. It's meant for compact spaces, which I love. And so this actually comes with 4 different sifters of different sizes that you can use, because I use this not only for soil but also to harvest my worm castings. So there's just a little rim inside of here that you're going to set your tray on top of, and then it's good to go. And then you can just take your soil and you'll just shake it. See how easy that is? Now there are other people that instead of kind of shaking it back and forth, if you just take your hand like this and you apply pressure, you're still going to get out a lot of those kind of bigger chunks. See what I mean? So just about a minute later, here's what we're left with, right? Some of the bigger chunks that haven't broken down. We've got some old roots, that are here. Again, this is what's left. So I'm just going to add this back to the pot because I am going to add this to the compost pile so it can break down even further. I mean, you can already clearly see the difference. So this area right here is what we just sifted through. And you can already, I can feel this, but you can already feel how light and fluffy it is. All right, y'all. So this is our after. I mean, look at that. This took me just a couple of minutes. And so at the beginning of my planting season, I just usually allocate a couple of days to do a few tiers of my green stalk vertical planters. And in no time, you really start to see how fast your soil can rejuvenate. So remember our issue with compaction? Now's the time to fix that. So this is the part where you're going to break apart any hard chunks. And if your soil is bone dry or acting like a brick, now is a really good time to just sprinkle it with a little bit of water. First, it's going to be easier to work with and way less dusty. Now, this is also the stage where I'm going to mix in a generous amount of perlite. Perlite is a natural soil amendment that loosens heavy soil, it improves drainage, and promotes root growth. And the mixture ratio is usually 1 part perlite to 2 parts of your cocoa core. If you're using perlite to seed start your cuttings, you're going to want to mix equal parts perlite and cocoa core for a very light soil mixture. Peat moss can also be used in place of cocoa core fiber. Yeah, that's looking good. Now, as I go into my spring garden, this combination would be enough. We are going to add a few more organic inputs that we'll get to in a bit. But because this mixture is what I'm going to be using for my summer garden, which is going to be experiencing very high temperatures and will be drying out a lot quicker, I am actually going to go ahead and add some peat moss to this mixture just to improve that moisture retention. So do you know that home cook who makes amazing recipes, but yet never writes anything down? Like, she can never tell you the exact measurements for any of her recipes? Hi, that's me. But that's kind of what you want to do with this recipe. Your hands, your fingers provide excellent information. In fact, they tell you everything you need to know. Because essentially, you want the texture to be light and crumbly. Healthy potting soil feels light and fluffy between your fingers. So if it still feels dense, add more fluffy stuff until it's soft. So now it's time to replenish the nutrients. Your plants ate up a lot of the buffet, so we need to restock it. Now there are a few ways that you can do this, and I often use a combination. Welcome to my unfinished basement. We are in the laundry room, which just also happens to be the location of where I store my favorite nutrient boost. Now, this is a free, continuous supply of worm castings. That's right, in this 10-gallon tote, there is worm poo, and they are amazing for the soil. There's a reason that they call this black gold, and that's because they contain concentrated nutrients in plant-available form and beneficial bacteria. And for something that packs such a punch, you are never going to overdo it. And so I'm constantly just throwing handfuls of worm castings into my garden. I mean, worm castings alone are one of the easiest ways to add amounts of NPK or nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, along with a host of trace minerals to your garden. And just to be clear, getting started with and maintaining a worm bin is super simple, which is why I do it. And you're also getting a superior product than what you're going to find at a garden center. They turn your kitchen scraps, items which you have already used and don't have utility for, into something that you can repurpose for your garden. And they do all of the work. And worms in your house are great guests. I mean, they don't make noise. A well cared for worm bin doesn't smell. The hardest thing about keeping a worm bin is that you just have to make sure that you don't overfeed them or overhydrate them. Now, if you don't have a worm bin, you can also use compost, which is like a multivitamin for your soil. And compost is excellent because it has a little bit of everything. You're going to get your macro and your micronutrients, along with beneficial bacteria and microbes and organic matter. And just like worm castings, your compost is going to immediately improve the soil structure and fertility. Now, outside of my worm castings or compost, I actually make all of my garden amendments. Yeah, you heard me right. Straight from kitchen scraps. Because once I realized that nearly everything I was buying at the garden center, I could make at home using inputs that I already had, that was a game changer. So I'm going to give you some homework. Since you're already watching this, the video that you need to follow this up with is where I show you how to make, I think it's like 9 or 10 of the most common fertilizers that you're going to find in a garden supply center. I show you how to make your own fish meal, your own bone meal, your own blood meal, an all-purpose fertilizer, and like 6 other ingredients. All right, y'all, so here's what it looks like inside of the bin. The worms do not like light, so they're gonna burrow underneath everything, but I need to go ahead and actually harvest a lot of the castings from here. But since I just need a bit for now, I'm gonna go ahead and scoop some up and put it in this container. Our work here is done, so let's go back outside. Okay, y'all, so now what we're gonna do is harvest our worm castings. So we're just going to pour everything in here, and you are going to notice, let's see if I can see a friend here. You are going to notice that I do have some worms that are here, and that's okay because after I sift them out, they'll be on top and I will just add them back to my worm bin. So see what I mean? These are the particles that still need some time to break down. These are my wormy friends, so let me go ahead and return them to the bin. Hey, also just pointing out real quick that these are all of the amendments that I'm going to show you how to make in that video, and I just restock them every year. So since we're towards the tail end of spring and we're coming up on the summer planting season, I'd like to go ahead and make just an entire batch of this mix so it's ready when I kind of turn things over. So I'm going to transfer what we've made here so far into a larger container that I actually keep up here when I'm about to turn things over, and then I store it underneath of my deck. And then I can return this bin to being like my working bin. I mean, sometimes I'll also use like a cardboard box to protect my deck or a tarp. Most of the times I just like to use a bin. So now I want to talk about some other things that I might mix and match to this base. So in this version, I initially started off with a base of the perlite. And perlite is great for drainage and aeration and breaking up hard compacted soil. But you might also see something in your garden center that's called vermiculite. And this is really great for retaining moisture. And so if I was going into the spring planting season, I might not add vermiculite to this mix, but it is something that I do enjoy bolstering with my kind of rejuvenation base as we're going into the hot months of the summer. Moisture retention is everything. So this is going to add a slightly denser texture to the mix. It almost feels like mica. Okay, so now we're just gonna mix this up basically until it looks like brownie mix with sprinkles. So you want this mix to smell earthy, and it shouldn't have any foul odors. But if you do smell anything that smells sour or like ammonia, that is a sign that something is off. And in that case, you just want to add more compost to inoculate the good microbes and let it breathe. So congrats, you did it. I told you it was easy. Hey friends, so we're just underneath my deck and I just store everything right beside my potting bench. I love that this thing is on wheels. If you're a container gardener like me, reusing your potting soil is a game changer. And the containers that I use are vertical planters called green stalks. I mean, I'm growing over 200 plus herbs and veggies on a deck. I mean, these vertical planters allow you to grow a minimum of 30 plants in just 2 square feet. I mean, green stalks are like the high-rise apartments of the container gardening world. And by the way, I have a $10 off link for green stalk in the pinned comment and description box below. But I remember when I got my green stalk planters thinking, oh my goodness, am I gonna have to refill this with planting soil every year? I mean, that would be a lot because a green stalk can take multiple cubic square feet of potting soil. So instead, I reuse it. Every tier just gets fluffed and fed. I add my worm castings and homemade amendments, and guess what? My green stalks are thriving. And y'all, I grow everything in these planters: tomatoes, peppers, nearly every kind of herb, greens, lettuces, root vegetables. And the only time that I am buying new potting soil is when I get a new planter. But my oldest potting soil is as old as my first planter, and this is going on 6 growing seasons now. And so oddly enough, my planters feel like old friends now. I know the soil, I replenish it, and it rewards me with healthy plants. So as you see here, the ratio of what I use to keep my soil healthy are inputs that I already have. It's the potting mix that I originally used in my planters, and I'm continuously adding these organic inputs that are coming from our kitchen scraps. So maybe about 20% of what's new in my garden are the amendments like the perlite and vermiculite, but certainly not the majority. And that's what keeps my garden affordable. So yeah, I'll normally just kind of top my planters off with some of the newer things that I'm buying, but outside of that, yeah, I am happy to report that gardening is no longer an expensive hobby. And I say all this because container soil, once refreshed, is as good or better than fresh. Things like fertility, handled, texture, handled, pests, mitigated. In fact, the combination of growing in green stalk vertical planters, which gives you a competitive edge over in the ground gardening, combined with how I refresh my soil and use organic inputs, really is making my garden easier to manage every year. There are only 2 things that I am doing right every year to consistently get the results that I'm getting as a gardener. Again, someone who maybe is slightly intermediate. And here's what it is. I leverage my soil and systems. I'm leveraging the design of green stalk vertical planters, which don't take tools or much time to put together, but are designed to give your plants exactly what they need in terms of delivering water and nutrients to your plants. And I do what I call seasoning the soil with my homemade garden amendments. You are not going to find a cure-all at a garden center, so just stick with the products that really give you the results. Okay, so that was the gist, but now I want to tackle some common questions and concerns. You can check out the coordinating blog post, but I anticipate that these questions may appear in the comments. So let me go ahead and address them now. Maybe you had a bout of fungus gnats, and some insect eggs or fungal spores could be in your soil. But before you panic and toss it, remember that this happens in nature too. But we don't scorch the earth and toss it. The key here is to just be selective. If a plant clearly died from a soil-borne illness, don't reuse that soil for the same type of plant. Instead, you can dump it in your compost or in your flower bed where different plants won't be affected. Now, you can also sterilize it if you're hardcore, but more on that in a sec. And even if you had a pest infestation in one particular pot, you can still take precautions. So for example, for fungus gnats, what you're going to do is just let that soil dry out completely for a couple of weeks, because those eggs will absolutely die without moisture. And on top of that, you can also mix in a little bit of diatomaceous earth or neem cake to deter pests. But to be honest, I rarely have a pest problem carry over after a winter's freeze or a good long dry period. And I am not a gardening expert, I am just your regular Jane. But for sure, always check your soil before you go to reuse it, especially if you see those like weevils. If you do, just pick them out of the soil. And here's a tidbit: if you have chickens, they love them and are a great source of protein. So there's the bottom line again. Unless your soil was terribly diseased, there's still not a reason to throw it out. And that's where the importance of rotating your crops or differentiating what you have as a companion plant really matters. So even if you grew tomatoes in it last year, grow lettuce or flowers in it next, because most plant diseases are plant specific. Even in your containers, you've got to rotate, especially if you're gardening for the long term. Now, many of y'all have seen the garden that I've kept for, well, I guess over 6 years now on the internet. And while I mostly grow the same thing every year, I am intentional about adding, new varieties of, this or that from a particular plant category. And this is one of the reasons why. And while I note each year where I'm planting what, I just don't have like one specific planting guide that I follow for my garden. Instead, I'm thinking about it in terms of like a 3-year kind of prototype of like, this is a garden profile A, B, and C, so that I'm always kind of interchanging, even if it's just subtly, like the rotations that I have, even as a vertical planter. So here's the takeaway. If you're a soil caretaker, it will live many lives, season after season, as long as you give it just a little bit of love in between crops. So the next time you finish a harvest and you're staring at that empty pot or pocket of dirt, resist the urge to trash it. Instead, think about all the potential that's still packed in here, waiting to be renewed. Refresh it, reuse it, and reap the rewards. Your plants will thrive and your wallet will thank you. And you're also developing the sustainable soil. One of the things that I appreciate so much about understanding the value of the soil that I'm growing here is that one day, and we're still a few years off, but it is my husband and I's dream to have a small homestead. And I know that immediately I can start planting and having a garden because I have premium soil here that I'm not leaving, but that I can take with me and start growing rich, abundant, nutrient-dense food from day one. And honestly, it feels pretty empowering to know that I'm not dependent on a collection of products from the gardening center to grow food. So, are you convinced? I would love to hear what you do with your old potting soil. And if you found this helpful, click like and subscribe for more punchy gardening tips. And I've got the Greenstock gardening code linked below for $10 off your order. I'll see you in my kitchen or garden soon. Take care, friends.